Hello, Eric Walczykowski here, host of Tailored Talent and CEO of Bespoke Partners. Today, I'm joined by one of my partners, Jenny Gray. Jenny, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Appreciate you having me. Great
So,
to connect.
Jenny, you focus on one of the most interesting parts of the market to me, which is that growth CEO, that, let's call it, 10 on the low end, but most likely that 30 million to 50 million. And what's so cool about that size company is it's big enough to actually have resources, but small enough where every little component piece matters. And to me, it's just such a cool segment of the market. So tell me a little bit about what you're seeing in those growth CEOs right now.
Yeah, good question. It's definitely, an exciting space to be in. Companies obviously evolve so much as they're going from the 10 to 20 to 30, and sometimes beyond, especially with M&A. I would say, at that size, oftentimes it is a founder that's leading the business. And then a lot of times we're getting brought in, after the investors have been in, maybe a year or two. And as they're starting to want to scale and thinking about exits longer term, that's when they want to bring in, someone that's worked with growth equity, before, or has been a CEO before, that can really, mature the team, mature the product, mature go-to-market and scale. I will say it's an active market in terms of just, volume of CEO searches at that size. A lot of the CEOs that we're working with are getting pinged, multiple times a week for various opportunities, and really focusing on just doing their homework and diligence to understand, does this business have legs, is an opportunity that they want to invest time in.
Well, when we talk to our private equity clients and part of their thesis, I think we see somewhere between 80 to 90% of these deals do involve a founder, which creates a really interesting or unique dynamic. So tell me a little bit about how you approach that situation where you do have the founder involved, and some of the intricacies as you think through who's the right person to assume the mantle, or as our board member Matt Scherers like to say, become the second CEO.
Yeah. I would say each situation is, obviously unique and case by case in terms of how much, the founder will remain involved in the second chapter of the business. With some of our clients, the founder is really like the head of technology or really that product innovator. And so they do want to keep him or her, around, whether that's just, on the board or actually still leading, a function day to day. And then there's other situations where, the founder is ready to fully transition, mostly out of the business, and they're less involved. So I think depending on the level of involvement, obviously each situation, is delicate in terms of how, the business is handling it. And then it's important for us to find a CEO that can partner, with the founder in terms of, how little or how much they're going to be involved, their personality type. A lot of the CEOs that we work with have, gone on to do multiple founder transitions. And so they understand some of the nuances that can go into it. Really just understanding like the team underneath the founder, their loyalty, how can they come in and create change without disrupting the entire business and build followership over time. And really, a lot of times it's just spending time, boots on the ground with the team to earn their trust and respect. And then also, valuing what the founder brought to the table and being able to have a conversation, with them on, what can they still leverage from that person's knowledge of the industry, of the business itself, and making sure that they understand the balance of coming in to make changes, but, also not being a bull in the china shop.
Yeah, totally. No, it's a nuance for sure. Lot to unpack with what you said. Let's start with the investor and the board and helping them determine what the ideal role for the founder is. Because a lot of situations we come in and there might be an idea that, well, the founder's going to do this, but given our experience and how many of these we've done, we've got to click a step beyond, because you and I both actually have had experiences where we've gotten into the interview process and what everybody decided was the right role for the founder wasn't going to work because of different aspects of the search. So talk to me a little bit about how you guide the board and the investor to truly determine what's going to work on the next chapter of this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I would say, in situations where the investor does have majority ownership, like having that conversation where there's very clear guidelines on, here's where we do or don't want your involvement. Here's what the cadence looks like. Here's teams that you will or won't own. I will say a lot of the time, involvement tends to decrease over time. And, maybe what they thought on the front end would work well tends to just, potentially be a roadblock for the new person coming in as they're trying to make changes and impact and get the team, bought into their new vision. So in a lot of cases, especially with investors that have done this transition multiple times historically, it's almost a, they would prefer to have someone be just involved from more of a strategic perspective on the board, as a sounding board, versus, leading a team and actively involved in the business day to day. That tends to be a bit of a cleaner break.
For sure. And I think as part of that process, if the founder is going to remain involved outside of just showing up to board meetings and providing advice and counsel, it's really important to have the founder an integral part of the interview process, not necessarily making all the decisions, but to flush out that interaction and determine whether that's really going to work when everybody gets married. Wouldn't you agree?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. That's definitely a critical part of our search process, is just guiding our clients on the front end of when and where should we be including the founder in the process, and, his or her opinion and voice on who we bring in. Typically, I would say we advise to have, the investors and the board, involved in our weekly cadence in the day-to-day of the search, and then looping in the founder, once we've found our top, call it 2 to 3 candidates. And at that point, it's more of a, chemistry check between both the founder and also the candidate, who they obviously want to, be able to ask questions from the founder's perspective. They want to know that this is someone that they can work with and they respect. And so a lot of it's just about building that relationship and making sure that they can spend some one-on-one time.
No, fantastic. Well, and the second part of what you were talking about is really the ideal candidate. And of course, in every search, we would love to find the person that's done this 5 times, 5 founder transitions. They've all gone perfect, made money, back channels all come back and the like. But that's not you. That always doesn't work out that way. And so let's talk a little bit about the criteria. So when we do see that successful 1 or 2 time second CEO or founder transition, what attributes really stand out that made them successful or allowed them to transition from the founder and grow the business to an exit?
Yeah. I would say that the first 90 days tends to be very critical in terms of how they're approaching the organization. A lot of the CEOs we work with will do kind of a, listening tour, they might call it, where they're out meeting the team, not making judgments and making decisions too quickly, but really understanding the different perspective of, sales, marketing, product, each function, who are the key players, who are we trying to retain? And then from there, coming to conclusions and being able to move, quickly at pace and make decisions from there. So I would say, CEOs that can do that tend to be quite successful, and having that kind of EQ and leadership to bring the team along together with, what oftentimes is a new pace, a new vision, something else that the team is marching towards. And then also I think it's just about understanding, like, knowing what they don't know, being able to on the board, or, experts on areas where they need to grow and expand.
And you mentioned EQ. In the founder transitions that I've done, I've just noticed it's so important. And it really starts, in my opinion, with understanding the founder and the original vision for the business and why they did what they did. Because if nothing else, even if that doesn't set up the future, it helps with the DNA. And so talk to me a little bit about how you help that second CEO suss that out, and whether or not they're able to actually understand that vision.
Yeah. I would say, hopefully CEOs that we're placing in a business can find the passion. It might not be to the same, level or idea that the founder has, but they obviously have a reason that, they've dedicated their lives to this, whether it's, something they love about the product and they see a huge opportunity to, disrupt a certain industry, or it's they just, love team building. But, likely a style from the founder, but I think it's being able to thread the needle of, also being able to get the team to buy into, why everyone's showing up to work every day and why this is interesting and compelling. So my advice to our candidates is, you understand the investment and the diligence behind it, but also just, is this something that is, going to motivate you day to day, and can you motivate the team around it?
No, absolutely. And so we talked about, hey, the multi-time CEO that we can place in this, that have done founder transitions. And in many cases, you get a level of comfort there. But let's talk about the first timer. And when you think about EQ, you think about org change, ability to attract a team. What attributes are you looking for in someone's past to ascertain whether or not they can be that first timer or step up CEO to do the founder transition?
Yeah, it's a great question. Oftentimes we, ideally will like to have seen the second in line person who's basically done it all in the number 2 seat. So if we are going to go for number 2, ideally they understand the industry. Ideally they've worked under, a phenomenal leader that they've been able to be, groomed and mentored under. Ideally, they've had a successful outcome, with similar investors to those that they'll be working with in their new opportunity. So it's like, ideally, they're checking all the scorecard boxes on paper as a number two. And then we'll very extensively just back channel reference them with former direct reports, peers, the former board, to really understand what are going to be the gaps that they are going to have walking in day one. Maybe it's, they lean more go to market and they're going to need help on product, or, just different things about their style and their leadership. So ideally, when they're stepping in, we have a good sense of here's where there'll be a fit, and then here's where some of the gaps are going to be. And a lot of times it's really just working with the board to make sure, whether it's bringing in an exec chair, that is a multi-time CEO that has the time to coach and help this person with decisions that they haven't encountered before, or just making sure they have a great ELT underneath them. Just being very eyes wide open in terms of where this person's going to need support, and then making sure that they're helped and coached along the way. And then I will say, we've had a lot of success in terms of placing the first time CEOs, because they're going to have a little bit of the chip on their shoulder, and they're going to want to put in the time, the effort, the hard work. They have to have a win as a CEO, or their career is going to be trickier. So there's just more skin in the game for them to do well.
No doubt. And I love how you talk about surrounding this first-time CEO with resources. And I think that exec chair, board member who's willing to spend enough time to get to know the founder as well, so that as the new CEO's operating, they can do some translation or unbiased feedback as that CEO's trying to make change, what's going to go over well with some of the critical resources that are legacy and might have allegiance to the founder. The other thing I've actually seen quite successful in this is actually bringing in an executive coach that will embed themselves in some of the operations of the business to do that translation between perhaps what the CEO is trying to accomplish and what the founder needs to do. Because a lot of these transitions I've found tend to be the founder's gotten the business to a certain level, but the processes that need to be put in place to scale the business aren't necessarily in their level of interest, purview, what have you. And I think that mediation becomes so important. And so I love the fact that you brought up the team aspect there. The other thing that I've seen to solve this is the board will recruit a president with P&L responsibility to come in and work with the founder. Talk to me a little bit about that and some of the nuances you've seen in the searches you've done, where you're bringing in the president that is going to be the succession to the founder CEO.
Mm-hmm. Good question. I would say, I've seen it, work out quite well. And I've also seen some challenges arise in that type of setting. Some of the more difficult scenarios, I would say, where it's, you're bringing in a president with the idea that they will eventually take over as CEO, but the founder changes their mind, or can't give up the reins to the business, as discussed in the earlier days. So it can be tricky with that dynamic when you want someone to really own the P&L, you want them to be the number two, but the founder's still there day to day, and they might have some difficulty giving up pieces of the business that they were previously leading, and that can become confusing for the team as well, where they are still kind of circumnavigating the president and going directly to the founder. But that being said, we've also done a number of great president searches where that's worked out really well. I think it's just a matter of making sure expectations and timeline are very clear on the front end, and those are communicated, down the line into the broader ELT and the broader organization, and then really just figuring out the chemistry between, where are we trying to complement the founder with this president? Do we want someone that can, balance out any gaps that the founder may have, but then is also ready, to be in the CEO seat at some point. But I do think just understanding the exact timeline to the extent that can be nailed down is always very helpful.
No doubt. Well, let's shift gears a bit. In this age of AI and AI's eating the world and SaaS apocalypse and all this great stuff. And the reality that you and I both know is when a software business hits a reasonable size, there's some durability there. And there's a real opportunity, if they haven't done it already, is to incorporate AI into their product suite, the future roadmap, and the like. So talk to me a little bit today about what you're seeing in terms of desirability in a CEO and this notion of being able to incorporate AI into the strategy.
Yeah, I would say, 100% of the clients that we work with are going to be focused on AI, both, how it's being used internally within the organization to be more productive, but then also how it's incorporated onto the product side. And then most of the candidates that we are working with, do they feel that this product and this industry is set up for success? Like, is it getting tailwinds from the AI movement? Will it struggle? Will it be disrupted? So that'll be, definitely a key criteria that candidates are digging into. And then from just, our selection process in terms of how we're screening and vetting candidates, depending on the scorecard and how heavily invested our clients, are, oftentimes we're now moving more towards the kind of product leaning CEOs that have some of that, AI competency and literacy. And then also candidates that are just very okay with making bold changes. They've done transformations, maybe not AI transformations historically, but some other transformation that they've gone through in their career. And those are going to be the ones that are more willing to kind of break glass and really make the changes that are needed right now.
No doubt, makes a ton of sense. I want to circle back to one of the things we talked to about setting the CEO up for support. And this really hits into board composition. And people may not realize it, but we actually do quite a bit of board work. Talk to me a little bit about your approach to building a board. And one of the things that, again, as a multi-time CEO, I've enjoyed is you have your financial investor and sponsor, but you also have external board members that have kind of done what you've done before and that operational guidance or viewpoint. So talk to me a little bit about how you approach those board composition searches.
I think having someone on the board that has actually been an operator is oftentimes hugely helpful, for the CEO and for the leadership team. And that's, a lot of the work that we do is we need someone to be basically a liaison between the investment team and the operating team. And so they want someone, whether it's an exec chair or just a director that can, they've been in the CEO seat before, they understand it. They can be, someone to bounce ideas off of, someone to, chat with. A lot of the board work that we do, ideally, they want someone who has time to, actually give to the CEO. So oftentimes they're maybe not in a full-time operating role because it can be, more intensive just from a commitment standpoint of, 5-10 hours plus a week, depending on what's going on in the business. But it's oftentimes usually about finding, if this company is trying to grow from 15 million to 50, with some M&A in a specific industry, it's, who's done that before, who understands the pain points, at each step along the way, and then finding someone that has good chemistry between, the sitting CEO, but also, will work well with the private equity firm style and cadence, and can really be, the navigator between the two.
No, absolutely. And I found the most effective, you have this domain industry experience as one vector, but then you also have functional experience that tends to spike in the areas that value creation is really important in that journey of $20 to $50 million, whether it's product transformation, straight go-to-market, AI forward, operational excellence, M&A. And I think, candidly, what I see across private equity, that's one of the most underutilized resources is designing a board that fits with the value creation model and having that go-to for the company to reach out to on the board that says, yep, I did this 3 times in these particular businesses, and this is what I think the road looks like. And so I think it's really important to incorporate into your board constructs and search. But hey, just a parting question. If you had some advice for a growth equity firm placing that next CEO, what are you going to tell them today?
Yeah, I would say, it is a competitive market right now, as we've spoken about. Most of our candidates are vetting multiple processes, getting multiple offers. So on the front end of our searches, we are really getting into specifics around just the process and how can we, speed things up, making sure, we're getting rid of any roadblocks, whether it's scheduling, how can we, pick the right people that are going to be part of the interview process, but move things around in real time as needed so that things aren't being held out. And then committing to, this is the process, we're going to stick to it. These are the decision makers, and having a very tight scorecard on the front end so that we can run, a quick search. And then on top of that, I do think it's important for investors right now to really lean into the selling aspect. I think that's really what is differentiating businesses right now, aside from the product and where the company's going. It's, does this board believe in me? Am I their person? And a lot of our clients right now are willing to, be on a texting, calling basis with some of our finalist candidates. Maybe they're flying to them to do, kind of a closing dinner. And I think the ones that are putting in the time and leaning in, that goes a long way for the candidate, because any CEO wants to know that they're wanted and they're going to have a great relationship with this new board, and they do have a choice right now. So I think it really goes a long way when our clients put the time in there.
Absolutely. I mean, I think you highlight another underestimated aspect of the search process, particularly for the CEO. And again, I think about CEO roles and taking those roles. A lot of times it comes down to a relationship, and it comes down to looking across the table and knowing that I can partner with this particular private equity professional. And it's not necessarily that we're always going to see eye to eye, but there's a level of trust where you can really hash out the details, but we both have the best interest of the company in mind. And I think that selling or relationship building trust aspect is just so important. Well, Jenny, I appreciate you coming on today and sharing some outstanding advice for PE firms and CEOs as they look at their next CEO gig. So hope you have an amazing day.
Thank you. You too. Thanks for having me.